Thank you for joining me to discuss the ins and outs of each of the science and engineering practices. My name is Eddie Walsh, and I want to start us off by having us consider a phenomenon you could explore if you were discussing an ecological event happening here in Idaho with your students.
As hunters across the state get their camo and orange ready for hunting season, Idaho Fish and Game is reminding them to be on the lookout for chronic wasting disease. This disease is contagious, it's incurable, and it is always deadly to animals. News Channel 7's Jude Binkley spoke to Fish and Game about where they're seeing the disease right now and what they want hunters to do after a harvest.
Morgan, chronic wasting disease affects deer, elk, and moose. It can't be treated, and it's leading to population declines of wild deer in several other states. And while Idaho Fish and Game doesn't know how the disease made its way over to Idaho, now that it's here in some populations, it's here to stay. So they're relying on hunters to help monitor for CWD. Big game in the Gem State have more than just hunters to be wary about with the recent rise of chronic wasting disease.
It's fatal. So there's no cure or treatment. So once one of our populations is infected, it stays infected, and we have to manage for the disease.
Idaho Fish and Game first detected chronic wasting disease in 2021 in Game Management Unit 14, north of Riggins and south of Whiteburg.
Since 2021, we've detected CWD in 49 animals, 1 elk, 8 mule deer, and 40 white-tailed deer.
Many of those cases have been found near the Slate Creek drainage north of Riggins. Once an animal is infected, it may take 18 to 24 months for it to die from CWD.
But they only show symptoms usually within the last 3 to 6 months of the disease. So an animal can seem and appear perfectly healthy, but they could be still carrying that prion.
Idaho Fish and Game says they rely on hunters for health surveillance.
And that doesn't change for chronic wasting disease.
They're asking for help across the state in providing samples from their deer, elk, or moose harvests. In Game Management Units 14 and 15 in north central Idaho, it's mandatory to provide a sample.
The rest of the state, it's voluntary.
Hunters can take a lymph node sample themselves, request a sample kit, or take a harvested animal to a Fish and Game regional office or check station.
And we just ask that our hunters help us out because we rely heavily on them so that we can find it in new areas and hopefully find it quickly.
And there have been no reported cases of chronic wasting disease affecting humans, but Morgan, the Centers for Disease Control recommends that people don't eat meat from an animal with CWD.
No, all good reminders. All right, Jude, thank you so much.
A quick and easy way to get students thinking about what they just saw would be to have them document what they notice and what they wonder about the video they just watched. After some quiet time to work independently, students can share out their notices and wonders in their pairings or groups before collaborating and selecting their top notices and wonders. As we lean into the science and engineering practice of planning and carrying out investigations, this would be a good opportunity to ask students to consider what they noticed and wondered about the phenomenon that might inform how the Idaho Fish and Game developed their investigation. If a student or group of students already began examining the Idaho Fish and Game's investigation, be sure you use that student-generated observation to lead into this next part. After having students consider the phenomenon generally, you can then have students reflect and consider what they notice and wonder about the video they just watched, paying special attention to the investigation Idaho Fish and Game put together to learn more about CWD. When participating in science lessons, students generally do not have the opportunity to generate investigations on their own. This lack of heavy lifting in the early phases of a unit or project can make it difficult for students to consider phenomena scientifically, since answering questions requires scientists to also consider how they can precisely and accurately measure the involved variables in their investigation. Only with frequent planning, implementation, and reflection of investigations can students develop personal mastery in developing scientific investigations. I want to go ahead and fully introduce myself. My name is Eddie Walsh, and I am the Region 6 Instructional Science Coach working with the Idaho Department of Education. I'm based out of Idaho Falls, but myself and the other science coaches are happy to meet you wherever you are in your science education journey. Our sole focus is to help teachers plan, teach, and assess around the Idaho Content Standards for Science. I wanted to take this opportunity to focus on how we can approach the science and engineering practice of planning and carrying out investigations. If you have further questions about how the Idaho Science Coaches can help you with your teaching goals, feel free to reach out to me at my email or visit our Idaho Science Coach website via the QR code or Idaho Department of Education website. When the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine developed the 3 dimensions of the framework for K-12 science education in 2011, the science and engineering practices were recognized as perhaps the largest shift educators would need to address to engage students in the immersive experience that is science. Asking students to plan and carry out investigations means giving students a breadth of interactions with a range of phenomena and allowing them to develop investigations surrounding the entirety of the phenomenon they have observed, not just the parts you want them to focus on. Students need to gain a practical sense for what it means to develop investigations suited for the laboratory as well as out in the field. They need to be able to pinpoint exactly what and how they are measuring in their investigation, how these measurements answer their research questions, and how they were able to verify their findings. As engineers, it's important to recognize how investigations can be utilized to measure the validity, success, and even safety of their designs under simple or extreme circumstances. I would make it my recommendation right now. If you can get your students to generate their own investigations independently, do it as often as you can. While students may initially find creating their own investigations to be messy and time-consuming, with frequency and practice, students will be able to develop investigations quickly with a more mature sense for the necessary and interpretive elements that go into producing a verifiable investigation. Investigations from the past include useful data you can present to students to get them to think about the scope and mechanisms included in a scientific investigation. The concept of flight was thought to be crazy in the 18th century, but Jean-Pierre Blanchard had a crazy idea about how he could rig materials and manipulate gases in order to take off. His efforts led him to being the first person to cross the English Channel by air. George Washington Carver saw the devastation monocultures were bringing to farmers and led countless investigations to inform crop rotation, which led to agricultural strategies we still use today. And when leaders decided to reintroduce wolves into Yellowstone National Park, Doug Smith facilitated the release and monitoring of the wolves. For each of these scientists, there was no playbook on how to accomplish the scientific breakthroughs each of them championed. So being methodical in the development of their investigations allowed them to identify techniques and materials that would suit their needs as they gather greater scientific understanding. Integrating the science and engineering practice of planning and carrying out investigations needs to look differently at each step in the K-12 student experience. We, as teachers and administrators, recognize when one grade band or another doesn't provide students opportunities to advance in their investigative skills. We limit student potential throughout the entire learning progression. Imagine gaining all of the content knowledge you could from a scientific discipline, developing thought-provoking questions that keep you engaged in the subject matter, and never being able to answer your questions for yourself. Imagine also never being oriented around the skills one would need in order to apply their investigative skills in a practical environment. The K-12 skills progression document on the Idaho Department of Education website breaks down the experiences students should be able to navigate to stay on track with peers locally and nationally. This document provides teachers with a starting point for imagining a range of student experiences that allows students to build competency in the range of skills associated with creating and carrying out investigations. When laid out in this way, we can provide clearer feedback to students and scaffold more for students who find producing investigations difficult or challenge students who have shown early mastery in the SEP. It becomes important to remember students often do not master a standard in a single instance, so planning several opportunities for students to flex all of their investigative skills within a grade band is critical for all students to stay on track in their science progression. If you are exploring any science standards around the interdependence or reproduction of species, you may reach out to Megan Heller, a fisheries biologist with Idaho Department of Fish and Game. Here, Megan Heller describes the strategies her and her research team used to study salmon populations and spawning behaviors throughout Idaho.
Hey everyone, my name is Megan Heller, and I'm a regional fisheries biologist out of the Salmon, Idaho office. I focus primarily on wild salmon and steelhead and wanted to share with you some of the really interesting work that we do. So some of you may have been fortunate enough to see Chinook salmon spawning from a ground perspective, but it looks a bit different 150 feet up in the air. Many of the statewide Chinook salmon spawning ground surveys are done from the ground from August through September every year, but many are done from the air as well. So why is that? Well, we can cover much more inaccessible ground this way, with fewer people, and usually in a lot less time. Depending on what rivers or streams we are surveying, either a helicopter or drone are used. So what does a Chinook salmon red look like from the air? Well, come fly with us and find out. For the next several minutes, we're going to look at a series of images collected with a drone in September of 2023. So a lot of the probability of observing a red from the air depends on the river substrate. What I mean by this is what the river bottom is comprised of, whether it's mostly boulders, gravel, maybe it's just really silty or sandy, or the opposite, and maybe the substrate itself is very clean. A couple of other variables that influence our probability of detecting a red are conditions like clouds or tree shading. One of the really positive aspects of aerial imagery is our ability to look at them as long as we need to, zoom in, or even change the lighting and contrast. I think you'll see how important that might be in just a minute. So when Chinook salmon dig to make a red, they uproot and sort cleaner gravel underneath the sediment. And oftentimes the contrast between the normal color of the riverbed and the cleaned gravel is how we're able to detect a red. The red in the photo here is an incredible example of what I'm talking about. This red is located in the Upper Salmon River near Stanley, Idaho. The Upper Salmon experienced multiple high flow events from rainstorms this fall that led to a lot of deposited sediment in the river from the Ross Fork fire that occurred in 2022. Consequently, a red that was built after the river and stream blowouts resulted in this easy to detect red. You can see the round nest that the Chinook salmon female has dug with her tail fin to make room to deposit her eggs. You can also see the tail spill of finer sediments that washed out downstream of the red during the digging process. There's also a Chinook salmon currently on this red that you can actually see in the photo. Pretty neat, huh? See the next slide if you're not sure what we're looking at here. Okay, so here's that same red in the Upper Salmon zoomed in quite a bit so you can actually see that spawning fish. What really stands out is how white her tail is, which is what she primarily uses to sort the gravel and dig the red for her eggs. We'll look at this red once again zoomed out so you can kind of get your bearings here. Okay, so here's that same red zoomed out again. So now can you see the fish in the top left corner of the red? We'll circle the red itself in pink and then the fish in orange so you can be sure that we're on the same page. Okay, so there's that red circled in pink, and there's that fish circled in orange. And just a heads up that this is one of the most easily identifiable reds that I've ever seen. All right, let's take a look at some more aerial images that contain reds in just a minute. Keep in mind that they come in all shapes and sizes, and they're not always in the locations that you might expect. All right, we're getting a little tougher here. The red in this image is not quite as obvious as the previous one. It's also a cloudy day, which is a variable that makes it a lot harder for us to see reds from the air. This red is also located on the Upper Salmon River, but it's a lot closer to the headwaters than the previous red. All right, here it is circled in pink. Nice job if you spotted it. Let's try a few more. All right, what do you think about this one? It's definitely a lot better lighting here. It's a really sunny day, but we are flying a bit higher, so that does make it tough. This red is located on the East Fork Salmon River, so you can see there's kind of a lot of differences in the substrate here than the previous two reds. All right, we're gonna circle this red and pink as well, just in case you weren't able to spot it. All right, there it is. Okay, let's look at an even harder one. All right, this red is also located on the East Fork Salmon River. This one is really tough and it's really easy to miss. All right, there's that red. If you got this one, you're a pro. If not, let's look at a very zoomed in picture so you can see what we're really looking at here. Okay, there's that red. There's also 2 spawning fish on this one as well, which made it a lot easier for me to spot. Otherwise, you can just see a slight color difference in the dugout red and the surrounding gravel. All right, let's look at one last one. Okay, this red is also located on the East Fork Salmon River. You can see here and in the previous 2 photos that the East Fork substrate makes it tough. There isn't much color difference between the reds and the surrounding area. There are a few fish on this one, which really helps to draw your eye in. Okay, there's that red. And that's the wrap. Thanks for playing, and hopefully you learned how to identify Chinook salmon red if you're lucky enough to see these amazing fish spawn somewhere in Idaho.
Examining the apparent and unapparent factors manipulated in this investigation of salmon spawning by Megan Heller should hopefully give you some ideas on how you can use the work real scientists are doing to bring greater understanding to the creation of scientific investigations in your classroom. If you are looking for strategies to bring investigation creation to the forefront of your teaching, I have a few materials you may consider if you feel this will be a rough start. Fisher Science Equipment has a range of lab equipment you can bring to your classroom. Many sensors and monitors hook up to Chromebooks, putting the data collection in the hands of your students. Students will need some orientation around use of the equipment, but with familiarity and practice, students will be able to manage the equipment independently. Pivot Interactives has many virtual tools students can use to create investigations. The virtual interface has many similarities to the assessment items used on the Science ISAT, giving students practice with testing elements so they are not caught off guard when they sit for exams in the spring. A database of simple and familiar investigations can be found at Science Buddies. While simply handing students investigations to complete does not satisfy the science and engineering practice we are trying to teach, these investigations can help students see how simple materials can be used to produce scientific understanding. If you have not had a chance yet, I would definitely encourage you to check out the investigation materials posted on the NSTA website. These teacher-created materials are vetted by teachers trying to accomplish the same learning outcomes as you, so use of the materials can save you a ton of headaches. The final resource I would offer for students to learn how to plan and carry out investigations is time. Investigations can take quite a bit of time, from planning to testing, revising, iterating, and reflecting. It's important when planning for you to accommodate time as a factor, understanding students may not do everything right in the first time. Consider going deeper into units centered around investigation and pulling back on content-heavy instructional days with lectures and worksheets. Thank you for your time today as we've covered how investigations can help students access authentic science learning opportunities. Hopefully the understandings and strategies outlined in this video make it less stressful to bring instruction around planning and carrying out investigations to your students. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me or anyone on the Idaho Science Coach team to clarify anything about the standards.